In this video, we will discuss the forms and translations of the perfect passive participle. We will also review some of the fundamental ideas about participles. Our first example describes a scene on Augustus Areopagus, the altar of peace. Femina a cygno vecta discadet. The nominative subject is femina. The main verb is discadet. We have a participial phrase, which is helpfully set off for us by commas. Vecta, the participle, describes femina, and a cygno is an ablative of agent. The woman, carried by the swan, leaves. Our second example shows the early Roman hero Cincinnatus, a retired general who was called away from his farm to lead the army once more. Cincinnatus a senatoribus inventus dicit. Cincinnatus is our nominative subject, and dicit is our main verb. We have a participial phrase, set off by commas again, and inventus is our nominative singular masculine participle, which describes Cincinnatus, who is also nominative singular and masculine. And a senatoribus is an ablative of agent. So, Cincinnatus, found by the senators, speaks. As we prepare to explore perfect passive participles in specific, we should first review the general nature of participles. A participle is an adjective that is formed from the stem of a verb. Because a participle is an adjective, it agrees with the noun it modifies in those three key ways: case, number, and gender. In the last section of this video, we will fully decline a perfect passive participle and look at all of its forms. Now, while participles are adjectives in function, it is important to note that they do retain some verbal elements, especially as they indicate tense and voice. The tense of the participle will always be relative to the time of the action of the main verb in the sentence. Participles can also sometimes govern participial phrases, which may include direct objects, adverbs, prepositional phrases, etc. One of our examples just now was femina a cygno vecta discadet. Notice that vecta modifies femina because it agrees with femina in case, number, and gender. We also have a participial phrase here, which has been helpfully set off by commas, a cygno vecta. We have those commas here, but watch out, you won't always have those commas there to help you. Let's now talk about how to form the perfect passive participle. For the perfect passive, we will need to use the fourth principal part. And we will use this fourth principal part to generate the perfect passive participle by turning it into an adjective. So for our first example, amo amara, we'll take that fourth principal part, amatum, and give it us, a, endings, and we have amatus, amata, amatum. For our second example, mito, mitra, we'll take the fourth principal part and give it us, a, endings as well, missus, missa, missum. And notice that these us, a, adjectives are adjectives of the first and second declension. Okay, now let's consolidate all of our information about the perfect passive participle. Remember that participles have tense, which shows a time relative to the time of the action of the main verb. The perfect passive participle denotes an idea that is earlier than the action of the main verb. Since the perfect participle is passive, the noun modified receives the action. And to form the perfect passive participle in Latin, we take the fourth principal part and use us, a, endings to turn it into a first and second declension adjective. To translate the perfect passive participle into English, our standard translation is having been blanked. Now, the having been is often a little bit clunky in English, so you might want to leave it out. But it can be helpful if you're trying to situate yourself in the idea of the perfect passive participle. And here are two examples that we've seen thus far. Amatus, amata, amatum, and missus, missa, missum. Notice that these use the us, a, endings of the first and second declension adjective. And we translate them as having been loved, or loved, and having been sent, or sent. Let's now look at an example of perfect passive participles from Latin literature. This one comes from Caesar in his accounts of the Gallic Wars. This comes from a passage in which Caesar is attempting to cross the English Channel to get to Britain. Et leni Africo provectus. and having been carried by the light southwest wind. That is, the wind coming from the direction of Africa. Media circiter nocte, around midnight, vento intermisso, literally, with the wind having been broken. But you'll notice in our translation we were a little bit more flexible. We said, around midnight when the wind had been broken. Cursum non tenuit. He did not hold his course. Et longius de latus aestu. And, having been carried off farther by a sea swell, de latus is having been carried off. Sub sinistra, on his left, Britanniam relictum conspexit. He saw Britain having been left behind. And you'll notice in our translation we left out the having been part of that. He said, he saw Britain left behind on his left. And I'd like to point out here that from this example, we can recognize how the perfect passive participle is an adjective and has case, number, and gender. The first example, proectus, is nominative, singular, and masculine with a us ending. The second example, intermisso, is ablative, singular, and masculine, describing vento. The third example is nominative, singular, and masculine, describing Caesar, the subject of the sentence. And finally, relictam is accusative, singular, and feminine, referring back to Britanniam. So just keep in mind that perfect passive participles, just like all participles, can have case, number, and gender. Let's now decline a perfect passive participle in all cases, numbers, and genders. We'll use weho wehera as our example. So we take that fourth principal part, vectum, and turn that into an us a adjective. We have vectus, vecta, vectum. And we decline this just as we would any other first and second declension adjective. So the masculines are vectus, vecti, vecto, vectum, vecto. The feminines are vecta, vecti, vecti, vectam, vecta. And the neuters are vectum, vecti, vecto, vectum, vecto. And we can move to the plurals. Vecti, vectorum, vectis, vectos, vectis is your masculine. Your feminine will be vecti, vectarum, vectis, vectas, vectis. And the neuters, vecta, vectorum, vectis, vecta, vectis.